The old cowboy, the original herd quitter, Kit Pharo, is somebody that I have looked to, gotten his newsletter and the information he's put out for a while, and it is something that I think anybody in agriculture should be paying attention to. He has so much experience and wisdom to share. Enjoy this interview with Kit Pharo. Kit, I've been a fan of yours for a while. Love just how you have been a force. And so the backstory on how I even came across your work and what you've done is I was prepping for an interview with Will Harris. And so that led me to the Herd Quitter podcast that he did. And you are, like an underwriter sponsor, a big part of that podcast. But Jared, what he's done has led me to, the Pharo Cattle Company and what you do in the incredible newsletter that you've put out. And so I wanted to visit with you on, a lot of the entrepreneurial side of the ag business, because as I look at it, the future's kind of scary. So owning a farmer's market and being extremely dependent on farmers, I'm seeing less and less farmers in the newer generations, and a lot of the older generation are just getting out of it. So thought that you would be able to just part a lot of wisdom. And will you start by telling me what Pharo Cattle Company is and why you focused in the way you have?
Well, that's a tough one to start with. Pharo Cattle, we started out in 1985. I was able to get back to what I was born to do, and that was ranching. And at that point, you weren't even around at that point, but at that point, the whole goal of the beef industry was to make cattle as big as we could, as fast as we could. And we had the tools to do that. We had EPDs, we had continental exotic breeds. You could do amazing things in a few short years. And I looked at that. I had the opportunity to lease 4,000 acres of grass, buy a commercial herd of cows. And I got to thinking. I had my dad was still alive at that time. I had some friends that were thinkers, and we all decided, it doesn't make sense to make cattle bigger. What we really need to do is improve or increase our profits. And so we kind of took a different approach. Every time you try to increase calf size, weaning weights, you increase cow size. In 50 years, that's 1970 to now, we've increased cow size by 40%. We got huge cows out there. It takes more acres for them to graze. They're not weaning nearly as many pounds per acre as we used to wean back with 400-pound calves. And so that's kind of where we focus. We said, okay, we're going to provide an alternative for the bigger is better philosophy, and didn't really think about being in the seed stock business or bull producing business, but we wound up there. We kind of started out with, okay, we're going to increase profit. We're going to do that through proper, good grazing systems. We're going to do that through saving money on expenses. We're going to calve in sync with nature instead of out of sync with nature. And those things were easy. And then we started looking for genetics that could even do what we wanted to do. And they weren't there. They were there, but we had to dig for them. And we kind of had to, it just took a few years from 1985 to 1990 for us to kind of have a handful of genetics that we knew we were headed the right way. But we didn't really know until 15 years into this what that kind of cow was going to look like, because you needed a 15-year-old cow to say, okay, I've had a calf every year. I don't cost very much to keep around. So, that's the type of cow we found. And, we've just kind of kept going from there. Pharo Cattle Company started out as a commercial herd because of the opportunity to get, provide genetics for other ranchers that I thought they needed. And I still think they need it. We looked at that opportunity and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And we were probably the only one for many, many years even thinking that way. I used to be the butt of a lot of jokes, and yeah, I remember another seed stock producer saying, if you want to have adapted animal or animals, raise antelope or pronghorn antelope. And so that's kind of where we came from. We sold 6 bulls in 1991. We're selling over 1,000 bulls now. We have I believe 7 bull sales a year in 6 different states. We have had a few bull sales in Australia. When the pandemic came in, well, we kind of gradually pulled out of that deal. But we've grown from a little bitty nothing to one of the top 10 bull producers in the United States. So that gives you a start.
That I love how your mind works, and that's the big pickup, and the biggest reason I wanted to visit with you is you see these opportunities that are in the opposite direction of the mainstream or the status quo. And I love how you distilled it down into like the biggest impact is changing out the bull for the herd, and do the best bull your way, the way you believe it fits. And so that entrepreneurial side of you, what do you give that to? Has it just been something you've always kind of gone, against the grain with the way you approach things?
Yes, and I didn't realize this at first, but I've always been this way. I'll back up another generation. My dad was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. He was a city kid, wanted to be a cowboy. He was able to put together a small cow herd, but he supported that cow herd with off farm income. So, I look at that and say, okay, Dad asked questions nobody was asking because he didn't have any bad habits or traditions to hold him back. And so I think I inherited some of that, but it probably until the mid 1990s, I didn't realize how anti status quo I am. Status quo, uh, status quo, I think Reagan says status quo is Latin for the mess we're in. What is status quo today at one time probably made sense in anything, but status quo always ends up being average or below. So, I'm anti status quo politically, religiously, and businesslike. And so I will see those opportunities. As you probably know, we use the term herd quitter. And I came up with that. We break away from the status quo herd. And that's basically what I'm trying to say there. In the beginning, I think it was early 2000, I shared that with our network of people. And boy, everybody thought they didn't want to be a herd quitter. We don't want to be a herd quitter. So I explained this to them, let's envision a herd of cows, and you're gathering these cows up to do them, wean their calves or whatever. And every herd of cows usually has one herd quitter. And that herd quitter stays on the edge. She puts her head up. Whenever she gets a chance, she takes off running as fast as she can. So you got to go back and get her, And those cows, and that's why nobody liked that term, but those cows are frustrating. But when you really analyze this, the only cows that are thinking for themselves are the herd quitters. The herd's going to walk over a cliff. She's not going to fall for that trick. So, it's if you're going to think for yourself, you got to get out of the status quo herd and do some thinking.
I love that. Some of the others that come to mind that as you're going through that have received a ton of flack by going against the herd, being herd quitters in different contexts is Jim Garish and then Gabe Brown, both of those. But I think that there's a certain league that has contributed to the betterment and profitability of farmers. I feel like that y'all's work is saving farmers because before I really got into the business side of agriculture, I didn't realize how few were actually making money and how few were dependent on the outside job or just barely getting by or subsidies or whatever it is to make things work. So what you have focused on in ways of making farmers profitable and having the next generation come in and take the baton, take the torch, so to speak, is crucial. So what do you think is like that fundamental lesson or fundamental ideas, principles that we need to make sure that we're hammering on going into the future with a newer farmer or the next generation?
Yeah, you touched on a whole lot of things there, and I hope I can backtrack and get focused on several of them. But you're right. The farming community, ranching community is not that profitable. The average age of farmers and ranchers, or ranchers anyway, I don't focus that much on the farmers. I mean, farming is so subsidized by the government that it's not even a business anymore. So, and a lot of ranchers are getting that way. 25 years ago, I stopped taking any payments from the government. I just won't do it. I want to have the ability to criticize the government, and as long as I'm part of the problem, I can't criticize the government. So I'm going to focus more on the cow-calf producers than farmers. But the average age of cow-calf producers is probably somewhere between 60 and 65. And you kind of touched on that. We're getting older and older. Next generation isn't coming in. I look at that. I say agriculture to be sustainable must be both profitable and enjoyable. And the reason the next generation isn't coming back is we're not seeing that much profit or enjoyment. Sometimes they're working very hard to make very little. And sometimes they're subsidizing it with one or two off-farm jobs. Well, the next generation looks at that and said, okay, mom and dad are working 40 hours a week in town, and then they come out, they put in another 40 hours a week after working on the weekends. And life doesn't have to be that way. It needs to be profitable. And that doesn't matter if we're talking about a little family farm or ranch or a big operation. There is not much profit or enjoyment in what we do. And if you backtrack a little bit farther, if you are calving in the middle of a snowstorm, that's not very profitable. Calve in sync with nature. If you're not grazing your land any differently than your grandparents did, you're losing out on a huge opportunity there. And then genetics, that's kind of the third key. You've got to calve in sync, wean in sync with your environment, and grazing. You can increase production per acre by 50% to 600%. I've seen cases where it was over 600% compared to the neighbor. So, you can't leave those things out. But at the same time, as long as your cows are not profitable, that doesn't work either. So tie it all together. The situation we're in right now, we're receiving higher prices for our cattle than we ever have in history. And I believe most people are profitable now, but none of them are, very few are profitable enough to start rebuilding the cow herd, which is the lowest it's been for 72 years. So we've got a low cow numbers, high prices. And normally when you have that, everybody jumps in and, we keep every heifer that we can, and the industry just shoots in the opposite direction. Cow numbers go up, prices come down. That's not going to happen this time. And the main reason is there's not profit in there. I've talked to a couple of bankers, and they say they've made more loans and operating notes in the last few years than they ever have in history. So even with these high prices, people aren't making money. I mean, they're hanging in there. And so I'm very focused on the next generation. We gotta make it profitable. And I think, our philosophies, our genetics, we're all about increasing profit and enjoyment in the business. You touched a little bit there. It needs to be a business.
Yeah.
I'm going to go speak to a group of cow-calf producers in New York next month. And I won't tell you what she really wanted me to speak about. This is a university professor, but I says, let me tell you what your problem is. You got cow calf producers there that have full time jobs, and you're teaching their kids at the university, and the kids want to go back, but they're not going to go back because they don't have a business that they want. So it's most of them aren't going to do it, but some of them will turn their little cow calf operation into a business that the next generation will take over. And I says, that's your problem. You've got kids that want to go back to the farm, but they're not going to go back to the farm if it's not enjoyable or profitable.
Not enjoyable and not profitable. I mean, I don't think any of us continue doing anything if we can't enjoy it, and especially if you're not enjoying it and you're losing money. That's it makes no sense. So I think you're spot on, and it almost seems too obvious, really. And so, why do you think some of these things that are obvious? For me, I've been around farming my entire life, but I'm not an active farmer. But like, you, Kit, you said have in sync with nature, right? Like, so like basically have the cows having babies when the deer or the elk or whatever the native, ruminant is. And so why is that not something that's obvious?
The whole goal in the beef industry for 50 plus years has been to increase weaning weights.
Okay.
And that's, in 1985, that's when it really took off. So if you're going to increase weaning weights, you've got to have bigger cows. You've got to have faster growing cows. You'll have cows that don't fit your environment anymore. And then in order to increase weaning weights, you're going to calve earlier than your neighbor because now in the fall, when you take your calf to a sale barn, he weighs 600 pounds instead of 400 pounds.
Okay.
And, that was part of the reason. And again, tradition and status quo. I remember when we moved our calving, I calved in April, but I moved it from April to May, and people just thought, well, that's crazy, but they don't think about it. Grandpa did it, Dad did it, the neighbors are doing it. You're just going to have a bunch of little bitty dinky calves, and that's not true. When we moved our calving season from the middle of April to like the 10th of May, we had a little bit smaller calves, but we weaned more total pounds of calves. Well, that's what we're all about, more total pounds, not bigger calves. And the reason we have more total pounds is because we had less death loss. So it just makes sense. But I probably ought to go a little bit farther. In sync with nature for most people in North America would be, May, June calving when the grass is its best. If you're in fescue country, like northern now Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee, Virginia, if you're in indified infected fescue country, fall calving seems to work the best. Indified infected fescue wasn't here when God created Missouri, but it's taken over Missouri, and it's toxic in the summertime and the best grass there is in the wintertime. So, that you can go against nature sometimes, and that's a place to do it. The Mediterranean environment, California, has different guidelines, but
Sure.
and some of our Gulf Coast states, we're fall calving in our cow herds in Texas because we have better forages in the fall and winter than we do in the summer. So, when I say in sync with nature, that makes sense if you're in North Dakota or Colorado. But if you're in South Texas, you know, if you're on native grass that's never been messed with, you can still calve in sync with nature.
Yeah.
We have some heat adapted herds in Florida, in Alabama, Florida, Texas. They can calve in sync with nature because the cows are adapted. But you can't take a purebred Angus or purebred Red Angus in those environments and calve in sync with nature. If you go across the border to Chihuahua in Mexico, calving in sync with nature is late July and early August because that's when the monsoon rains start. Prior to that is their worst months. But you go down there, most everybody's calving in March, except for the smart guys that are making money. And the deer don't have their babies down there until late July or early August.
Yeah. that it makes so much sense when you lay it out like that, and when you just kind of get back to principles. Almost seems like another example, which there are many, of kind of having your flashlight on the wrong area and moving towards the wrong thing instead of what you had said, profitability. Like, we're not we're looking at weaning weight, and we're not looking at the profitability of the whole operation. It just kind of makes no sense. And then the regional aspect of that is really interesting, and it reminds me of something Will Harris told me. Is like, what I'm doing down here in the, the coastal savannah of Georgia is different than what you're going to do in Arkansas, or Gabe's going to do in North Dakota. And so that is something else you seem to have taken advantage of, with helping having more of a regional consistent genetic based off of different geographic regions with the cattle. So can you go into a little bit more of the genetics on regions? You had mentioned Angus, but I think Mashona and South Pole, and then there's some new breeds that are coming in. I'm curious your take on genetics in relation to regions.
Well, I don't think it's too complicated until you get in extra hot regions. The Angus and Red Angus come from Scotland. I mean, that's where they originated. If you follow a latitude line, is I guess it's latitude going east and west, you're going to end up in the middle of Canada. So Angus in Mississippi, southern Mississippi, they'll survive, but they weren't made for that country. They cannot calve in sync with nature. But you take a Mashona, which is an African breed, and we're breeding the Mashona for the most part to Red Angus. So that half blood Mashona is a tropical breed, and they can calve in sync with nature in those areas. Not that that's the best time, but we've got cooperative herds in 12 different states, from Minnesota to Alabama, Montana to Texas, east, west, north, south. And basically, we have a bull sale in every spring. Our sales are coming up. Every spring, we have a bull sale in Texas, a bull sale in Missouri, and a bull sale in Colorado. In the fall, we have a bull sale in Colorado, Alabama, Nebraska, and Montana. And all of these bulls are born and raised in these environments. They're developed in these environments. And if you're selling to somebody in South Texas, he needs something that's going to fit his environment. If you're selling to somebody in Missouri that's dealing with endophyte infected fescue, he wants bulls that have been bred to tolerate endophyte infected fescue. So we started our cooperative herds for a little bit different reason. What we were doing, even though everybody thought I was dumb as a fence post, what we were doing were working, and people were catching on. Every year, more and more people were catching on. We needed more bulls, more and more bulls. And there's no way I want to have a ranch big enough that'll produce 1,000 bulls. If only half of your bulls make it to the sale, that means you're producing 2,000 bulls and 2,000 heifers. I just don't want to do that myself. So we work with like-minded people that understand our philosophies, understand our goals. We believe we have what the cow-calf world needs to survive, especially when these prices fall. But in the drought of the early 2000s, I sent all of my cows. I had some cows on 3 different ranches at that time. I sent most of them to Missouri, some to Iowa. I don't know if I sent any to Oklahoma at that time or not. But I was sent those to our customers in those areas. I leased those cows to them. They followed all our rules, and they kept the heifer calves and built their own herds. So, that's kind of where a lot of these cooperative herds started. Is, I didn't have any. We had no grass in Colorado, so we moved the cows to other states. But I think, as far as breeds, I think the Angus and Red Angus still do have the most to offer. What we look for is ultra low maintenance animals, something that can meet their maintenance requirements, survival, and then start laying on fat. A cow's not going to get bred until she's laying on fat. So these tall, late maturing, high growth Angus, I mean, you've got to feed them really hard to get them to, the same point that they can breed. Our cattle, are low maintenance. They meet their requirements, and then they get fat, and they get bred, and it's a different animal. And yet, when you drive out through my pasture and I show you my cows, first thing you're going to say is they're not as small as I thought they were, and they aren't. My 3 and 4 frame cows will weigh more than most people's 5 and 6 frame cows because there's more cow there and less legs. The difference between a 5 frame and 4 frame is 2 inches, and almost always that 2 inches is legs. I've got a deeper body in my cows than anybody else has, but I have less legs. And I found that area between the ground and the belly doesn't weigh anything, and you can't eat it.
I love that. I love that. In your newsletter, you had mentioned a wild cattle. I believe it's Alaskan Islands or something, but it
Aleutian
got me
Islands.
thinking. What's it called?
Aleutian Islands.
The Aleutian Islands. And so that got me thinking, because you asked the question, what would a wild cattle that could survive look like? That took me down a rabbit trail that I thoroughly enjoyed. But I've got a couple buddies down in Australia that are really big in the Nguini cattle, which I guess the Michonne has actually been recognized as part of that. But anyways, it's the
In
adaptability and
Goonie or in Guinea?
do what?
In Goonie or in
In
Guinea?
Nguni, yes. My
So that's
Arkansas
a
mispronunciation.
South African breed.
So they're huge on that, just the adaptability, the resiliency to the Australian climate down there. But that just got me to thinking how important the efficiency of an animal in these operations is. And so what you've done seems to, you've almost taken nature and commercial applications and merged it together like perfectly. So I just think that's so cool how you have done that. So to back up just a little bit, the newsletter you do, that is something that I have enjoyed way more than I ever would have thought. And you put a lot of time and effort into that. So how did you start the newsletter? Why do you care about that? Why is that such a big deal? And thank you for doing it, because I've had fun.
Way back near the beginning, we started selling a few bulls, not very many, 6 bulls in 1991. And I had a really close friend who was a mentor. And had I not had him, Chip Hines was his name. He's gone now, but he was the guy that kept me on the right track. It was real easy to look around and say, nobody else is even thinking like you are or I am. And he said, no, you stay with it. You're right. And he says, you can't just sell bulls. You've got to educate people and tell them why you're doing what you're doing. And so 1994 was the first newsletter I ever wrote. It's just a 1-page article. I shared it in the newsletter you just read. 30 years later, the same article. And I said, my philosophies, my goals, my message has not changed for 30 years. So I shared it again. And the whole thing is there, God created the cow to do amazing things. And then man came along and tried to change the cow to do what he wanted to do. And so that whole newsletter was kind of focused around that article. And then the thought question, if you could turn your cows loose for 50 years with no human contact, what do you think the survivors are going to look like? And I used to ask that question a lot, but you need to take a look at that. Is that cow going to be as big as she is now? I bet the survivors are a lot smaller, a lot thicker, they don't wean as big a calves, but they get bred every year and they just keep going. And that's the Nguni. I saw the Ngunis when I was in South Africa, and they're a lot like our Corrientes. I mean, they're small, they're colorful, they got horns, they can survive on nearly nothing, and that's why they work. They're probably a little too small to fit the industry here in America, but it would be fun to try. But yeah, and then I showed the Aleutian Island. I came across them back because my message was, basically the same. And when I was in Canada speaking at some event once, somebody walked up, you need to go check this out, these Aleutian Island cattle, because they've been on their own for 80 years with no human contact. The Russians put some Ayrshire spotted dairy breeds on there to start with. There's been Herefords and Angus and Charolais put on there, and you can see those colors. I showed pictures of the bulls that are on that island. You can see spotted colors, yellow colors, red colors, black colors. You can see all of these animals have different colors, but all of them are built exactly the same. They're thick, they're short, they're massive, in weight, not height. Calving eases, you've got lost all your calving problems. They can survive, with nothing put in by man. And I think in 50 years, I can remember my dad's little herd back prior to the 70s. He didn't have to provide much. I mean, these were little Hereford cows that they did it on their own. And then we started saying, okay, we want bigger and bigger weaning weights. And now we got cows that have to be babied to stay in the herd. And that's why we're losing money. If you could create a herd of cows that fit your environment in Arkansas with no inputs, you're going to make lots of money. And that's pretty much the way it is. But
It's pretty much that simple, isn't it?
yeah, it is.
The two things. One, a little bit of a tangent. Jacob Walkie is my buddy down there that has got is it Nguini?
And Goonie, I think.
Goonie, yeah.
Goonie.
He is buying basically retired dairy jerseys, and he's crossing them over because they can't get any more of the South African blood imports and stuff, and so it's very condensed. So he is taking these jerseys and crossing them, and then retaining the halves, and then crossing them back. And anyways, he has developed a market down there from the dairy beef. So this older dairy beef, and people are loving it, and everybody is attacking him. So it made me think about what you were saying, going against the grain. He's the only one doing that. Some of it is brutal, some of the things people are saying to him and about him, but he's making it work, and he's trying to build up his herd. And so I just think that, there's crossovers, and it's hard to go against the grain. It's hard to kind of have everybody against you. I know, for me, trying to embrace the journey with my son's cancer, I did not go conventional. Like, we did other things. So I've been called a hippie and crazy and all kinds of other things along the way. But, he's 10 years old and thriving. He's five, he's from when he was diagnosed 5 years ago. So I think that it all comes together. And one more thing, if you can just clarify something with the management practices when we're talking about inputs. Why is the kick the hay habit something that Jim has been, vilified or made out to be a quack? Because everybody feeds hay, and that's craziness. So can you put your spin on that topic?
Well, inputs are what's killing us. Winter feed is going to be the biggest expense cattlemen in most states have. Now, in the southern states, that's not so much. Again, we have created a operation and genetics that need extra inputs. Now, there are places that maybe, instead of kicking the hay habit, you should just graze in the summertime. I talk to people, they tell me how brutal their winter is. I said, well, either move or change what you're doing. You can go to Arizona in the wintertime and you can run stockers, maybe grass-fed stockers in the summertime, make more money, have more fun. But I don't know. Again, it goes back to, if you're going to have cattle that fits your environment, you're not going to have the biggest calf at the sale barn. And I think that's the goal everybody's still trying to go. I don't know. But I do know that, if you're doing everything the same way the status quo is, any business you will never be above average. You're just following the herd. There's nothing to gain there. You're all average. You're not thinking for yourself. You're just that herd that just kind of mindlessly goes along. So I think the really successful guys in any business throughout history have been the contrarians who said, the world's not flat, it's round. They got harassed too. I mean, some got put to death, but it's that's what drives this thing is thinking for yourself and seeing the opportunities and taking advantage of them. I think too often, anytime there's an opportunity, that with your business, there's risk involved. You can't just grab onto every opportunity without risking something. And I think a lot of people overanalyze things and they say, okay, I better not do this. I might lose everything I have. And my theory is, let's do it. And what's the worst that can happen? If I can handle the worst that can happen, I'm okay with it. And the worst that can happen is you fail and you go do something else. How many times did Edison? How many failures did those guys have before they had successes? So we are our own worst enemies in that area, and we don't like to be different, look different from the neighbors. We don't stand out. I don't mind that anymore. I mean, I thrive on that. I look for groups to talk to that think I'm still think I'm crazy. They're getting harder to find. In the early 2000s, I was still a nut. Now I'm becoming, eventually what we're talking about is going to become status quo, and then we're going to have to fix that.
I love it. It. Reminded me, one of my early mentors was in real estate, and he said, if you want to be average, do what the average do.
Yeah.
That's
pretty status quo.
The status quo. The status quo. All right. Well, Kit, what do you have coming next? Where can we send anybody that wants to learn more, but whether that's to get seed stock or just to get that amazing newsletter, and what's next for you, and then tell us how to find you.
Okay, I didn't say this, but we've been sending out a newsletter since 1994, and now it's quarterly. It used to be monthly, then bi-monthly. Now it's quarterly because we also send out weekly emails. So the weekly email is basically an abbreviated version of a newsletter. And so we kind of back to, and most people have email nowadays. So the best way to sign up for our emails, weekly emails, and our quarterly newsletter is to go to our website. And I mean, there's several places to sign up there, but the website is Pharo, and that's Pharo, PharoCattle.com. Again, new people don't really know how to spell Pharaoh, but it's like the Egyptian pharaohs without the H on the end.
I love it. As you've gone through everything, and I've read the newsletter, it takes me back to something that Temple Grandin said when we visited. It was share your knowledge, and that builds this trust. It builds this following. And so what you've done, what she's done, Joel Salatin, Gabe Brown, they all come to mind too. Is helping people solve their problems. Really creates this goodwill and this support. And so just thank you for what you do. Thank you for taking the time to visit with me. And I knew you were a little leery with the interview, me being just some crazy old country boy that doesn't actually farm, but I have thoroughly enjoyed getting to learn from you. So thank you, my friend.
Well, one other thing I will add to what you just said there, I sent that very first newsletter out to 200 people, and those are friends and customers. That's all I had in my network at that time. That network, from that point on, when I sent out my first network or newsletter, I started getting speaking engagements. Everybody wants to hear the crazy guy from Colorado. More and more people signed up. It didn't take long. We went from 200 to 1,000 to 5,000 to 10,000. We've actually got almost 40,000 people in our database, but only 20 of them are active. 20,000 are active. And I think that's critical. No matter what business you're in, develop a network of people. When we had that drought in 2002 and we needed to move cows, I just had to put the word out, and I had good places to put those cows. If I need something, I just put the word out and I got it. But it is, to me, it's educational. There's a lot of things about my business I don't enjoy doing anymore. I do enjoy the weekly emails, the quarterly newsletters. And the reason I do is because I know I'm helping people that are paying attention. And that's just keeps me going. That's what I live for.
It's beautiful. That's beautiful. I love it. Kit, thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate your time.
Yep. Thank you, Logan.
Thank you for joining us on Sowing Prosperity. Be sure to follow along across the social media platforms, including YouTube, and be sure to go to sowingprosperity.com.